Hi, I'm Michelle, the Irritable Vegan. I'm here to share my vegan low FODMAP journey and hopefully take some of the BS out of IBS. Now today I'd like to share with you some pantry staples and recipes for using up whatever you have to hand. Now I'm going to try and make these tips as general as possible so that they apply to every vegan low FODMAP kitchen whenever you might be watching this, but I also want to make it specific enough that it's going to be of some real help to you during these very unusual times that we find ourselves in. Now before we begin, I just want to say that in no way am I encouraging you to rush out and buy everything that I'm going to show you today. Rather, what I want you to do is think about experimenting with possibly the things that you find at the back of your cupboard that you may not have had the confidence to use before, or that you may not be overly familiar with, and also to come up with maybe some new ways of using up ingredients that you may find yourself needing to cook with day after day after day. Practically everything that you see here today are items that I already had in stock. And that's just due to the nature of the types of videos that I make here on YouTube and also to my normal eating preferences. I didn't purposely go out and buy any of these things solely with the intention of making this video, and everything I'm going to show you today are things that I use on a weekly, if not a daily basis. I last visited my local Aldi just over a week ago, and I have to say they were fantastically well stocked, and I really do think they're doing a marvellous job. Here in the UK, we've had some strict measures put in place to avoid the likelihood of people panic buying, and I for one am genuinely really grateful for those measures, even though they came a little bit too late in my opinion. So please make sure that wherever you are, wherever you're watching from, you're taking advice from your local government and you're acting accordingly. So with all that being said, let's get into it. Before we get started, I just want to explain a little bit more about how this mini-series is going to work. This was originally filmed as one video but ended up being way too long, so I decided to break it up into sections. Each section will feature different types of pantry staples with low FODMAP tips and recipe ideas for how to make the best of them. I'm hoping to release one section per day for the next week, so by the end of the week we'll in effect have an entire pantry staple tour broken down into sections. By doing it this way, it's going to be much easier for you to find the section that applies to the ingredients that you have available. Now, because this was intended to be one video, each section will feature the same intro and outro, and that's because each section in the series needs to work as a standalone video. Because some people may only ever watch one episode, it all needs to make sense. If you'll be watching more than one video in the series, and I really hope that you do, I'll pop a timestamp in the description box so that once you've seen the intro on the first video, you can skip straight to the content on the rest. The only thing that you do need to know is that the video clips playing over this part of the intro will change depending on what we're talking about. So if you prefer seeing some visual inspiration for recipes, you might still want to watch this part. As the series progresses, make sure that you check the description box, because as each video releases, I'll be leaving a link to it below, and also the recipes, videos and resources that I link to will change to reflect the ingredients featured each day. I hope all that makes sense, and I really hope you find this series helpful. And now, let's get into it. So let's begin by taking a look at some different varieties of rice that you might have on hand. Now this is a traditional short grain rice. This is actually sushi rice. I've got whole grain brown rice, some easy cook white rice, some pre-cooked basmati, and I've also got some quinoa. And the reason for that is that all the recipe tips I'm going to give you in this section could also apply to using quinoa. Now rice generally is low FODMAP, and usually you can eat it to your appetite. I believe it's only red rice that actually has any FODMAPs listed. Now I use rice interchangeably in recipes, so if a recipe traditionally calls for a short grain rice, something such as a risotto, there's absolutely no harm in attempting it with whatever other rice you have on hand. So in the past I've made risotto with a pre-cooked rice and just cooked it for a little bit longer in the sauce to thicken it up. The same with long grain rice. You probably just would be better off not rinsing that and cooking it for longer than you would normally to help the grains stick together a little bit better. So please don't be worried if a recipe calls for a specific type of rice. I would think that at the moment using any type of rice interchangeably is still going to give you something pretty close to the recipe you're trying to follow, and it's still going to be a delicious, nutritious meal to eat. So to give you some recipe ideas for using the rice that you might have on hand, so for a breakfast, something nice and easy would be a rice pudding. Typically you'd use short grain rice for that, but it is possible to make it with long grain rice. You may just need to cook it a little bit longer. And this was sushi rice. So on the packet it said sushi rice. That doesn't mean that it can't be used for anything other than sushi. So there's no reason why you wouldn't use this for a rice pudding, for a risotto, for anything else. It's purely just a short grain rice. It doesn't have to be used in exactly the way that it says on the packet, and that applies to pudding rice, to risotto rice. They can all be used interchangeably. So for a rice pudding, I would tend to use a canned coconut milk base and keep it very simple. Just stir some peanut butter or some jam in there. If you do have any fresh or frozen berries, you can throw those in there. Rice pudding is one of those dishes that's incredibly good for using up maybe some overripe strawberries that are just about on the turn, because you're going to mash them up there into that rice pudding. If you're anything like me, you're going to give it all a good stir up anyway. So that's a really good way to make sure that the last of fresh fruit doesn't go to waste. I also really like savoury rice breakfasts. So what I typically do with either a long grain white or brown rice is I would, with the cooked rice, I would just quickly toss it. It takes 5 minutes at the most, with some tofu, whatever vegetables I have to hand, fresh or frozen, and some spices, and that can make a really nice, really filling, satisfying breakfast. For main meals, I like to add cooked rice to salads and soups. It really just helps to bulk them out and make it much more of a main meal than a starter or a side dish. If you do happen to have any fresh tomato, pepper, aubergine on hand, then stuffing it with cooked rice, some nuts and seeds, possibly a little bit of tofu or some pulses if you have them, can also make a filling meal. And that again is another nice way to use up maybe the last of the pepper, the last of the tomato that's just going a little bit past its best. Once they've been roasted in the oven with all that succulent rice inside, it's going to make a really delicious meal. Typically most people are used to having rice as an accompaniment to a main meal, so something like a lentil chilli or a vegetable curry, and of course you would just have your rice alongside. But rice can also be the main dish. So I really like using rice for like a stir fry, a fried rice dish. And again, I tend to grate some tofu into there so it takes on the appearance of like an egg fried rice. Any fresh frozen canned vegetables, some curry powder, a little bit of soya sauce, and you've got a really delicious meal. If you find that dried rice is quite scarce in the supermarkets, as it is at the moment, then you do have the option of looking to see whether they actually have any of the cooked rices available. Now for low FODMAP, you do want to look for the plain varieties. I know that there are a lot of flavoured rices out there. Many of them are probably going to have a lot of very high FODMAP ingredients in. So if you can find the plain, this is really handy, really quick, really convenient, especially if you're using any meals where you need cooked rice. The problem with this obviously is that this typically only has 2 servings. It's expensive when compared to buying a bag of dried rice, and obviously you've got all of the extra packaging. But if this is all you can get your hands on, then I definitely recommend keeping a few packets of this in. And one of the benefits of this as well is that even though it's pre-cooked, when it's vacuum packed like this, it really does have a long date on it, and this one's going to last till the middle of next year. So even though it's cooked, you know, you can still get a long shelf life out of that. And everything that I've just mentioned for all the recipes that we just spoke about, if you don't have rice available, you can use quinoa. And one of the benefits of that is that quinoa has a slightly higher protein content, I believe. and it's also quite nice to give a mixture of texture. If you've been eating a lot of rice recently, it might be nice just to mix things up and throw in some quinoa if you have it available. So there you have it. Now I've really tried to make sure that all of these tips apply to your vegan low FODMAP pantry whenever, wherever you're watching this from. But obviously at this moment in time, I really hope that these tips are gonna serve you well. Please take care of yourself and your family, buy only what you need and what you're realistically gonna use over the coming weeks. I think we can all agree that our retail workers at the minute are doing a hell of a job. Please let's not make their job any harder than it needs to be. I'm pretty certain that most of them would much rather be at home, safe and sound with their loved ones. Please reach out to me in the comments below to share your tips with the rest of our little community, and also to ask for any recipe advice, any meal ideas or inspiration that you may need. You can check out the other videos and playlists that I have available. I really think that some of them are going to be useful to you now and in the future. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye!